There's a strange reputation that follows certain roles inside organizations. Human resources might be one of the most misunderstood. Even outside the workplace, if you tell someone in your personal life that you work in HR, they often react in the same way. They laugh a little, maybe they make a joke, something like, "Oh wow, HR? That's scary." Most of the time, people are joking, but jokes like that usually come from somewhere. Before we get into the story, the details have been generalized for privacy. Imagine working in HR for a moment. Even outside of work, you start noticing something interesting. You meet people in your personal life, friends of friends, and someone asks what you do for work. And when you tell them you work in human resources, the reaction is almost always the same. Someone laughs, someone makes a joke, something like, "Oh wow, I better be careful what I say around you." Or something like, "You're the one people need to stay away from." Most of the time, people are playing around, but it still reveals something deeper about how people see the role. For many employees, HR has become the face of discipline inside an organization. The department that delivers warnings, the department that appears during investigations, the department involved when someone is about to lose their job. So naturally, people associate HR with the worst moments of their careers. But that perception hides something important about how those decisions actually happen. Because the reality is that most HR decisions don't begin in HR, they begin somewhere else, usually with a manager, managers raising concerns about employees, managers document performance issues, managers make recommendations about disciplinary action. And often, by the time that HR actually becomes involved, the direction of the situation has already been decided. HR's role is often to make sure company policies are followed, to make sure that documentation exists, and to make sure that the organization is protected legally. But the decision itself frequently begins somewhere else, in conversations that employees are never part of, in meetings that they never attend, between people who will never say those things directly to their face. Sometimes HR is asked to execute decisions that are very straightforward. An employee with many absences, or an employee who has accumulated multiple write ups, or someone who clearly violated company policy. In those situations, the outcome is usually obvious, but not every situation looks like that. Sometimes, sometimes HR is asked to carry out a decision that feels far less clear. Manager may say they want someone removed from the team, but the reason isn't always obvious. The employee might actually be doing the job well and have a strong performance with no disciplinary history at all. But for some reason, the manager simply doesn't want them on their team anymore. And at that point, the situation becomes much more complicated. Because in HR, they may now be responsible for executing a decision that they didn't originally make. There's another difficult reality inside organizations. Managers, they can sometimes make claims about employees that the employee never hears directly. Concerns about attitude and fit. Concerns about how someone interacts within the team. Those conversations can happen in meetings that the employee is never invited to. By the time that HR becomes involved, the situation may already be moving toward a specific outcome, which means that the employee never really has the opportunity to defend themselves in that process. That's why it can sometimes feel ironic to hear the phrase that HR exists to protect the company. Because sometimes protecting the company means carrying out a decision that removes a good employee, someone who's doing their job well, someone who wasn't causing problems, someone who simply had a manager who didn't want them on the team. What does it actually mean when a manager says they don't like someone? Is someone's suitability for a job based on whether they perform the work well or whether their manager personally likes them? And when HR is asked to carry out those decisions, what does that do to the culture of the organization? Situations like this help explain why HR sometimes becomes the villain in workplace stories. Employees often see HR as the department that delivers the outcome, but they rarely see the conversations that led to it, the discussions, the recommendations, the decisions that happened long before HR appeared. And because those conversations are invisible, HR becomes the face of a process that began somewhere else entirely. So it raises an interesting question. When an employee blames HR for a decision that affects their career, are they blaming the people who made the decision or the people who are just responsible for carrying it out? And how many workplace villains are simply the most visible part of a process that started somewhere else?